Good morning, dear students. Now you are going to cover David Copperfield chapter 7. The title of this chapter is Life on My Own. Life on My Own. David, as I told you in chapter 6, he started his new life with Mr. Cunyon. Mr. Micawber sent him away to London to start his working life. Okay? In this chapter, we are going to meet a new characters, Mr. Micawber, Mrs. Micawber, his wife. Okay? Those people were the people David lived with them. Okay? He went to live with them in their house. So they were David's lodgers, okay? The content of this chapter. David's new job. What was David's new job? David went to work in a factory which filled empty bottles with wine, okay? And his wage, or his the salary, the weekly salary, I call it wage, 6 shillings only, which was not enough amount of money to live a comfortable life. Okay, and he met Mr. Micawber, okay, who took him from the factory to his new house, and he introduced him to his family. David's new job and his meeting with Mr. Micawber. Who is Mr. Micawber? Mr. Micawber, he was a very kind man, but he was in a great problem. What was that problem? That he was always in debt. What is the meaning of debt? It means he borrowed money from people and he couldn't return the money back. Okay? So he was always followed by his creditors. What is the meaning of the word creditors? Creditors are people who lend money. The people who lend money, creditors. Okay, and the one who couldn't pay the money back, he was in debt. Okay, so Mr. Micawber used to face this great problem. So he decided to rent a room in his house to David to help him to solve his financial problems. Okay. Mr. Micawber is David's new landlord. Mr. Micawber, when he went to take David from the factory, he speaks to David in a very stiff, formal manner. But he also seems friendly. He offers to come meet David after work and walk him to the Micawber home. So David won't get lost. He was a kind man. Okay? Later on, we will know that David considered Mr. Micawber and Mrs. Micawber and the whole family his own family. Okay? Cunyon, Mr. Cunyon, the one who took David from Mr. Murdstone, okay, explains to David what he will make. That he will make 6 shillings a week, which isn't enough amount of money to live a comfortable life. Mr. Micawber has a wife and 4 children, 2 infant twins, a girl of around 3 and a boy of about 4. So all of his children were still very young. Okay? Mr. Micawber is in a bad financial place right now. Financial is a word related to money. Okay? He is in a bad financial problem, as I told you. He was always followed by his creditors. He tells David all about it. They became friends, David and the family, so he knew everything about them. He wanted to help them, but he himself faced a great financial problem. He took only 6 shillings every week. This is the reason that Micawbers are taking him on as a lodger. As I told you, the reason of taking David as a lodger, the one who rented the room, was that they needed the money. Creditors, people who collect debits, who took the money from the debtors, visit the Micawbers all the time. Mr. Micawber, finally, when he couldn't pay them back, he gets arrested and sent to debtors' prison. In the past, the prison or the jails, the prisons were divided, not like nowadays, one prison for all the people. No. There was a place for the people who couldn't pay the money back. Okay? Later on, Mrs. Micawber sold all the furniture in the house. He couldn't feed her babies, so she went to live with Mr. Micawber in prison. It was allowed in the past, but nowadays everything changed. Okay? Mrs. Micawber finally decides to move into the debtor's prison with Mr. Micawber to live with him. And she hands over the keys of the Micawber house to their landlord. She returned the keys to the owner of the house. So David now, he didn't find a place to live. He decided to rent a room, a very small room, near the prison. Why? To go to visit the Micawbers every day, because he considered them his own family. David moves to a small room near the debtor's prison because he doesn't want to part with the Micawbers. Part with means to be away, to live away, to separate. Okay? In fact, the Micawbers are more comfortable in prison than outside of it. At least they get regular food. They could have food. Outside, every day they suffered to find food. David regularly goes to have breakfast at the debtor's prison with the Micawbers. Mr. Micawber, finally, he managed to take deals with his creditors, so he was set free. He decided to start a new life without any debts in a place called Plymouth. So he decided to move, okay, to leave London, which had a great effect on David, okay? This affects David greatly, okay, that he decided to change everything in his life after the departure of the Micawbers. So Mr. Micawber managed to make deals with his creditors, and he is released from debtor's prison. Mr. Micawber, before he left, he gave David 2 pieces of advice. First, he told him not to delay any work till tomorrow if he can do it on the spot, on that day. The second advice was to spend his money wisely, okay, and not to take money from people. He didn't want David to suffer or to face his own problems. So he advised David to be wise in spending his money. He told him, if your annual means every year, if your annual income is £20 and you spend only 19, the result is happiness. And if your annual income is 20 and you spend the 21, the result is misery, or he will live a miserable life. And then David waved goodbye to the Micobers and they left. David decided to start a new life and to end his suffers. He thought of Aunt Betsy. His mom told him about her, okay, before she died. So he decided to find Aunt Betsy. He sent Peggy a letter asking her the address of Miss Betsy and asked her a small amount of money. Peggy sent David some money, and she told him that she didn't know exactly where Mrs. Micawber lived. She told him that she was in Dover, a place in England, okay? David decided to go there. He faced a lot of problems while traveling or walking to his aunt, Miss Betsy. He went to rent a carriage to take him to Dover, and he paid the money to the rider of the donkey, who asked him to bring all his lodging, his package, his bags, okay? And he took everything, and in the morning David waited for him. He didn't come. So he lost his clothes, he lost his bags, and he lost the money in the same time. David insisted on going to Miss Betsy. So he decided to walk all the way over from London to Dover. Okay? The trip or the journey was very difficult for him. He walked 23 miles on the first day. He slept the garden outside the Salem house. He didn't enter, he slept outside. It was the first night for David to sleep without a roof over his head. Okay, so David slept in the streets. He crossed fields over fields. He walked for 6 days. Okay, he ran out of food. So he decided to sell his coat, the only thing he had, his coat, to a shop for 18 shillings, okay? And the man gave him only 14 instead of 18. When David returned back to ask him the rest of the money, he kicked him out of the shop. Now David was dirty, tired, smelly, okay? Finally, he reached Dover. So now let's read David's way to Dover. David doesn't plan to stay at the warehouse for much longer. David is going to run away, to escape. Run away means to escape. He wants to go and find his aunt, Miss Betsy Trotwood. David becomes determined to run away to Miss Betsy. David writes to Peggy and drops hints to try and work out where Miss Betsy lives, to ask her the address. He also asks if he can borrow a little money. Peggy writes back that Miss Betsy lives near Dover, but she is not sure exactly where. She also includes some cash for David. She sent him some money. Determined to reach Miss Betsy's home in Dover, David sets out on foot. He passes a small second-hand clothing store, sells his waistcoat, as I told you, for a small sum of money, and then spends the night in a haystack near Salem House School. It was the first night to stay, as I told you, to sleep without a roof over his head. Then, finally, David went to Dover. He kept asking about Miss Betsy Trotwood. No one knows where she was. Finally, he went to a shop. Miss Betsy's servant was buying things from that shop. David asked the shopkeeper about Miss Betsy. He told him, I don't know. The servant told him, no, don't come with me. She doesn't like boys and she doesn't like beggars. He insisted on going. When he went to her house, he found her working in the garden, okay, with muddy gloves. And when first she saw him, she wanted him to go away. He kept on talking quickly, okay, to force her to listen to him. He told her that he ran or he walked all the way from London to her. He introduced himself to her, telling her that he was the son of Copperfield. Okay? He told him that his mother married a man who took everything from him and threw him away. And then he fainted. He fell unconscious on the floor. Okay? David, a dusty, sunburned, the sun burnt his skin, half-clothed figure, arrives in Dover after 6 days of traveling and inquires about his aunt, asked about his aunt. Miss Betsy or Miss Betsy Trotwood, seeing the ragged urchin in her garden. She was working in her garden. Sternly bids him, go away, I don't want you. Okay, go along, no boys here. But when David tells her who he is and what an unhappy life he has led since his mother's death, she takes charge of him. So again, let's read again. Miss Trotwood, seeing the ragged urchin in her garden, that man or that boy was David. And here we describe the way he looked. Sternly bids him, sternly, go away, bids him, go away, go along, no boys here. As I told you, she doesn't like beggars, she doesn't like boys. Okay? But when David tells her who he is and what an unhappy life he has led since his mother's death, she takes charge of him. Okay? This is the end of chapter 7. I hope you get it, and I want you to read it and then read the summary. Finally, answer the questions and be sure that you will cover each point under the questions. Thank you.
ازاي لا من ولا ورقه